Welcome back to the Unseen podcast, a podcast dedicated to missing people, unresolved cases, and UK true crime. Today we're going to be exploring the 1981 murder case of Caroline Harris Reid, who was killed in Lambeth in South London. Her death was so out of the blue and unnecessary that it shocked the local community, as did the trial that came as a result of the police investigation. This episode contains descriptions that some listeners may find distressing, including some discussion, while not graphic, of sexual assault, so listener discretion is advised. On the evening of April the 8th, 1981, 22-year-old Caroline Harris Reid made the over 200-mile journey from her home in Exeter in Devon, southwest England, to South Lambeth Road in London. Caroline was a second-year English student at the University of Exeter and was travelling to London to visit her friend Catherine, who lived in the city. Caroline had grown up in the Yorkshire town of Harrogate until she was 11 years old, when her father Michael and mother Jean had inherited some farmland in Northampton. The family moved down to Northampton before eventually settling in the area of Great Missenden, in Buckinghamshire, where they owned 200 acres called Presswood Farm. Growing up, Caroline was known as a kind and intelligent young woman who did well in her studies. She passed her A-levels and then decided to go on to take part in a secretarial course in London. After this, Caroline decided that she would continue her studies at the University of Exeter, and by 1981 she was in her second year. She shared a cottage in a very small village around 4 miles from the city itself. Caroline had met Catherine when they both went on a skiing holiday to Italy, and they had become friends, along with a male friend, Andrew, that they met on this same holiday. They were all meeting at Catherine's flat that evening on April the 8th. While she was there, Caroline had also told people that she was going to look for a holiday job during the Easter break from university. Caroline pulled up to the converted Victorian semi-detached house on South Lambeth Road, where Catherine lived, and the plan was that their friend Andrew was also on his way to meet them. This evening would not pan out the way that any of them had thought, and it would end with tragedy. The alarm was raised a few hours after Caroline's arrival at Catherine's home, and it would be by Catherine herself. She alerted the police that something had happened to Caroline in her home and that they needed assistance. Catherine herself was clearly upset and disturbed by what she'd witnessed. She recounted the events that had led up to the police being called. She explained that her and Caroline had been in her home on South Lambeth Road and had been waiting for their other friend Andrew to arrive. It was at this point that the intercom to get into the flat had buzzed. The pair had assumed that this was Andrew arriving, and Catherine said she pressed the button and heard a male voice say hello. There are 2 versions reported of what happened with the intercom. One report states that the intercom system was not working properly and that this man did not need to identify himself to come through the door, and the other implies that Catherine believed that this man was Andrew, so let him up to the flat. Catherine then states that the man came up to the flat, but when they opened the door for him, they realised it was not Andrew. The man barged through the door and retrieved a 7-inch knife and a potato peeler from the kitchen, and ordered the 2 women to strip naked at knife point. He discussed his sexual fantasies with the 2 women, and asked them to become intimate with one another. During this assault, Catherine stated that Andrew had turned up at the flat and rang the doorbell and threw stones at the window, but this did not deter the attacker. After a while, Catherine stated that she feigned illness and the man shut her into another room. At this point, she said she heard a gasp from Caroline in the other room. Not long after, the man came into the room where Catherine had been left. She noticed that he was holding a blood-stained knife. She said he left the room for a few seconds and she hid the knife from the attacker, hoping that this would perhaps slow him down. When he came back in and couldn't find the knife, he went for Catherine's throat, at which point she started screaming. She explained that the man tried to put his hand down her throat to stop her from screaming, but it didn't work. When he couldn't get her to be quiet, the man decided to leave the flat. The story was harrowing and terrifying, and police immediately went to the flat to assess the scene. Police later described Catherine's room as looking like a butcher's shop. Pathologist Ian West stated that Caroline had a 6-inch deep knife wound and that it appeared that the knife had been twisted when it went in. This knife was found to have a serrated edge and was found at the scene. Caroline was lying in the bedroom on her back with a tweed coat lay on top of her. It was found that the position of the coat indicated that Caroline had been dragged to that position by someone who had bloody hands. It truly was a vicious and unprovoked attack, and the brutality of it shocked everyone on the case. There was another element of the scene which was certainly picked up by newspapers at the time. That was the fact that an open Bible was found at the scene. This was thought to be Catherine's Bible from her home, but it was the page that it was open at that caught the investigators' attention. It was open at chapter 5 of the book of Micah. This chapter has been described as violent and uses many incendiary words such as cut off and vengeance, anger and fury. This sparked the theory that this could have been committed by, quote, a religious maniac. This was something that was stated in articles in tabloids very soon after Caroline's murder. Whether this was true or just sensationalist reporting is something to take into account. Another theory that was noted in the press soon after the murder was that this could have been the work of a peeping Tom who lived in the area. There had been reports of this type of suspect spying on couples on Clapham Common, and there was a possible link suggested to this. Scotland Yard issued a photo fit of the killer. He was described as in his late 20s with mousy hair and about 5 feet 6 inches tall. He was wearing a white t-shirt, grey trousers and a light-coloured jacket. It was hoped that this photo fit would resemble someone and that information would come in as a result. Caroline's family was said to be deeply shocked and upset by what had happened to Caroline and wanted privacy. Those that knew both Caroline and the family in Great Missenden expressed their shock and horror at the news of what happened, with one neighbour of the family saying, "Everyone here is stunned. Caroline was a lovely girl and the Harris Reeds are a marvellous family. What has happened to them couldn't be more unjust." Police stated that Catherine was, quote, absolutely heartbroken and too upset to return to the flat. This was completely understandable given what she had been through, and no doubt her information about the suspects was invaluable to the officers working on the case. Catherine was involved in the investigation given that she had got a very good look at the killer for several hours, including body type, expressions, and his features. Despite quite a thorough investigation with an eyewitness, the case appeared to be moving slowly, and little progress was made in the months following the murder. This is how it appeared on the outside. However, around 11 months after the murder occurred, an arrest was made. "21-year-old Frank Harvey lived on South Lambeth Road, almost opposite Catherine, in a row of masonette houses. His flat was said to be on level with Catherine's on the other side of the road. At the time of the murder, he worked as a storeman at a shop, and his arrest came off the back of 2 positive identifications by Catherine. It's reported that in April, just 2 days after the murder, Catherine had pointed out Frank Harvey as possibly being the man who had killed Caroline. 7 months later, during an identification parade in November 1981, she again pointed him out. During the trial, which took place in May 1982, Inspector David Hewitt told the court how Catherine reacted during the identification in November. He said that she was shaking when she pointed out Frank Harvey, saying that it was him. He said, "I remember it very clearly, being very dramatic, and the most clear identification I have seen." Catherine told the court that she recognised the man due to what she called a deformed nose. She stated that as soon as she saw him in the original parade in April, she noticed it. She said, "After I looked at him, I just burst into tears. It was so similar it could have been the same person. One nostril was closed up and it did not look as if he could breathe through it. I noticed his nose when he was leaning over me on the bed." It was stated at trial that when Catherine took part in the second parade in November, the men all had their noses covered with plasters. Catherine again pointed out Harvey in the lineup. She said she knew even without seeing his nose. The prosecution asked her if there was the possibility that she was wrong. She said, "I knew it was him." Frank Harvey explained that he had an alibi for that night. He said he was at the local pub but had felt unwell and he'd returned home that night to his bed. In his summing up, the Judge Justice McCowan QC issued caution to the jury when coming to a decision based solely on just witness identification evidence. He explained that while Catherine had seen the killer for over 2 hours in the flat and got a look at him at several angles, they still had to consider if this evidence is enough. He explained that a witness might be honest and convincing, but still mistaken. The quality of the identification evidence was what mattered, not the volume. It may be good even if you only have one witness. He said, "You test whether it's good or poor by examining closely the circumstances in which it came to be made." He told the jury to do their job and decide whether it has been proven in law. The jury retired and deliberated for 7 hours, before returning with a message for the judge. They stated that they couldn't come to a decision in the case and couldn't agree on a verdict. The judge decided that as a result, a retrial would have to be ordered. This meant that the trial would have to start all over again, in the hope that this time a verdict would be reached. It also meant the jury were unsure about the evidence against Frank Harvey that had been presented. He would remain in custody during this time, where it was reported that he'd been in voluntary solitary confinement. The second trial took place in October 1982, around 5 months later. At the end of this second trial, a verdict was reached. Frank Harvey was found not guilty of the murder of Caroline Harris Reed. The second trial was not reported on by the press. This was down to a judge ruling. It would turn out that there was another charge against Frank Harvey that was also making its way through the courts. The other charge was connected in some ways to Caroline's murder. On the 12th of November 1981, 18-year-old Amanda Marshall was walking her dog near South Lambeth Road at around 8:30 p.m. when a man came up behind her. He put his arm around her neck and his other hand on her bottom. He held her tightly and at one point he put his arm inside his coat as though to imply he had a knife. She turned and got a look at his face. The man said to her, "If you scream, you're dead. I won't hurt you if you do what you're told." Another man approached them as this was going on, and the man told Amanda to not say anything. Amanda's dog was barking, and the man eventually ran off. This was a terrifying assault, and Amanda had got a look at the man's face. During an identification parade, she had picked out Frank Harvey. This, along with the identification of Harvey by Catherine a second time in November, had added to the suspicion that he was a sexual predator that was prowling around the South Lambeth Road area. Due to this connection to this other case, the judge had ordered that the press not report on it. At the end of October 1982, Frank Harvey was in court again for the assault on Amanda Marshall. This time he pled guilty to the charges of indecent assault. The judge described the assault as a nasty and frightening offence, but stated that the maximum sentence he could impose would be 2 years. He explained that due to the murder charges, Harvey had already spent around 10 months in prison, and due to good conduct his sentence would be reduced to 1 year anyway, which the judge felt he had already served. Amanda's family were angry about this sentence, with Mum Patricia storming out of the public gallery, saying, There is no justice in this land. The judge asked her to stay quiet, saying, "Your intervention is understandable." Mrs. Marshall spoke to the press outside the Old Bailey, saying, "The judge was talking about the effect on Harvey, his family and his girlfriend. What about the victim? My daughter has been frightened to go out at night ever since this happened. It may have been a minor offence, but it's not minor to a girl standing there, finding a big man with his arm around her neck and touching her intimately." Frank Harvey's defence, led by Michael Hill QC, explained after the decision. The consequence of his arrest in connection with this matter was that he found himself charged with a quite appalling murder committed in April of the same year. He also stated that Harvey had been kept in quite poor conditions due to his decision to go into voluntary solitary confinement. He said, "The conditions in which he was kept were far more onerous than usual. As a consequence of these matters, he suffered a penalty, due, it is true, to the allegation of murder, which more than compensates for the crime in which he is admitted in this case." The defence appeared to be saying that he was connected to the murder as a result of the assault, which he had admitted, and that due to the fact that he'd been imprisoned for those months on the suspicion of murder, he'd already paid his dues for it. This argument, however accurate in terms of law, would have been no solace for Amanda's family, and I'm sure Caroline's family, who were back to square one with her case and investigation. It was now back to being an unsolved crime with no justice. In 1983, it was reported in the paper that a Scotland Yard spokesman commented on the case. They said, "The file on the case is technically still open, but I think it would be a fair bet that nobody will be charged. It's unlikely that we shall be looking for anyone else in connection with this matter." This is an extremely hard thing for anyone to hear, and the fact that they believe that they got their man and just could not prove it beyond a reasonable doubt is difficult in any case. This is such a tragedy, and I feel so sad that Caroline has still not had justice for what happened to her. If you know anything about the murder of Caroline Harris Reid in 1981, then please contact police on 101. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you'd like to support the podcast further, then you can on Patreon and contribute to exclusive polls to get extra bonus episodes every month. You can also get access to new episodes early and ad-free. You can use the link in the show notes to visit Patreon and see what we offer. You can also support us by reviewing the podcast wherever you listen, including Spotify, and also just share the episodes. You can subscribe on YouTube and follow us on social media. As always, I'm Caprice, and this has been Unseen.